Hello and welcome back to another edition of Around the Association. I'm your host, Charles Fallon, back in here with another episode. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about after a busy, very busy, well, not that busy. You would think it was busy, but it was a light weekend, actually. So, completely on the opposite end of the spectrum. A light weekend at the Stone Yard Cup only, but a lot of drama that we must go over. We got to start with Brayden Bennett. What a drive from 16th to first. Who would have predicted him to win after a lackluster Friday? Of course, the major talking point, Jared Ayers versus Lucas Sambér. The sanctions laid down on Ayers for his actions at the conclusion of that race and his driving thus far in 2026. We got to talk about Toyota. They're back quietly. They've won 3 out of the first 4 races this season. Man, they actually look like the manufacturer to beat with these new regulations. We're also, it's unofficially the first quarter of the season, of course, with the schedule being 17 races instead of 16. It's unofficial now, but I mean, still 16 points paying race weekend date. So we'll call this the first quarter of the season, which means per usual, it's time to discuss the biggest surprises and disappointments of the new year thus far. We'll talk a bit of silly season as Doug Bowden secured the bag to stay with his father's team through the 2033 season, now the longest tenure driver in the sport. And then we got to preview Orlando Motor Speedway, the first short track and night race dates of the new campaign. But first, before we get into it, we got to shout out the sports premier partners, Circle B Diecast / Plan B sales. You already know. Use coupon code ASCA for free shipping on any orders $20 and more. And if you want to cop a Braden Bennett replica diecast, head on over to Circle B Diecast / Plan B sales to do so. And then we also got to shout out the sports merchandise shop. You want to cop some Brayden Bennett gear. Rising star in the sport, has won the second most races of any driver over the last 16 events. Head on over to the ASCA's merch shop and use code season12 to save 30% at checkout during this special 2026 sale. So yeah, let's get into it. And first, we'll begin with Brayden Bennett. What a drive! What a drive from 16th to first. And to kind of put things into perspective on his drive, Ian Adande started next to Braden Bennett. He qualified 15th and he finished, I believe, 18th, 3 laps down, total non factor. Bennett starts 16th, drives all the way to victory lane. And I think this really is a testament to the new regulations and the unpredictable nature of this season and just so much chaos, calamity. These guys still trying to figure out these cars, 900 horsepower V6 turbo hybrid engines. The teams, they're all over the place. Michael I Racing, they looked pretty lackluster in practice and qualifying. And to be fair, most of them were. You had Randall Woods. He went a lap down. He finished 12th or something. You had Bern Renard, second in points. He blew a tire, took out Colin Ward. Big moment in the championship that we'll talk about a little bit later on. And then you had Jared Ayers, who, of course, we're definitely going to talk about later on. He also finished 2 laps down. Ross Jackson also back half of the top 10. He finished outside, I think, like 13th. He really didn't have much speed either. So it was Brayden Bennett. It's kind of coming out of nowhere, and he's proven to be one of the best drivers in the sport at the Stone Yard, which isn't surprising because very similarly to Cameron Atwood, he's been very good on the short tracks, and he's one of the best in the business. You can already tell at managing his tires, managing his equipment, very similarly to Atwood, like I said, which is ironic that they had that incredible battle at the end of this race. And that's what I want to give a huge a shout out to Bennett for is this kid's only 25 years old. He's only in his third year in the Cup Series, and he held off Cameron Atwood, of all people, hard charging, going 110% on a long run. Like, that is Atwood's wheelhouse, the end of a long run at a track like the Stone Yard that eats tires for breakfast. Um, that's when he's at his peak. And, he was going all out, on his equipment. He had saved until the end of the run. It was unfortunate that he lost the lead in the pits because otherwise he would have won the race pretty easily, I believe. Which yet again, his pit crew cost him at the Stone Yard. And his pit crew, man, they thought they had gotten those issues kind of ironed out heading into the new year with a completely new 17 crew, but obviously not. Still an issue for him with CJ Barrymore Racing. And I'm kind of starting to get the sense that Atwood's growing frustrated at that team. And maybe he might be on the move once his contract is up at the end of next season. We'll have to keep a close eye on that because you could tell on Twitter, like he's getting frustrated with this, having it happen over and over and over again. But back to Brayden Bennett, what he was able to do, fending off a driver like Atwood that is so good at the Stone Yard, so good at saving tires, so good on these long stints, managing his equipment, what he was able to do, fending him off at the end, especially at his age, only in his third year, limited experience, like that tells me, yeah, this kid's going to be a title contender. And especially another thing, seeing these young kids bounce back from adversity. Bennett had an awful performance last week in West Virginia. It straight out took out, 3 top 5 cars, just lost it on the restart, and took out himself, Lester, and Sambér. And he had a car that was he was the only driver besides Healy to lead laps. So he had a car good enough to challenge Healy. And he was, kind of the only one within Healy's zip code all day. So, he was pushing a little too much on the restart and he lost it, pushed the limits too much, lost it. He owned it 100% on him. And it looked like he was, a little bit more tentative this weekend. Weren't sure how he's going to bounce back. Oh, he bounced back all right and vaulted himself all the way up from 13th to 4th in the standings. So now he's firmly in the title hunt. Yeah, he's right back in the mix. He's got to win this season. Could very well go back to back, considering he is the defending Orlando winner after all. And this was the point last season that he really began to turn his year around. He was 22nd in points after West Virginia, and he vaulted himself all the way up to 4th by season's end. This year, the championship is so much more wide open. Like, you don't have Todd Kidd and Diego Urquidy just in their own zip code miles ahead of everyone else every week. Like, no, we've seen Brent Renner, Colin Ward, they've gotten themselves into trouble. Greg Healy, the raw pace is there for him. Same thing for Lucas Sambér, but they just haven't been able to put together full races yet. Carson Schmidt, he's been incredibly consistent, but Urquidy Bros Racing, they still don't quite have the speed. Like, this championship is wide open right now. And that's what's made this season so good. But so Bennett being 4th in points, he's right back in the mix. Huge win for him. And watch out for that 11 team, especially over these next couple weeks, heading right into his wheelhouse. He finished 2nd, 1st, and 2nd during this 3-race stretch last year. There's a very real chance that Bennett could win the next 3 races in a row and go on a Cameron Atwood type 2023 run. I'm not saying, but I'm just saying, especially with the speed that Toyota has, don't be surprised. So huge win for Braden Bennett, tough loss for Cameron Atwood, and an even tougher defeat for Lucas Sambér. Man, you got to feel for the guy. It's still crazy to believe that he's never won in the ASCA. He never won in the Craftsman Series before getting the promotion of the Cup. But, that was more so due to just his advanced age. Flores Motorsports were more comfortable giving Sambér that initial shot to drive their car. Through the first 3 years of the team, they obviously decided to move in a different direction. They signed Tommy Woods, which was a disaster. But hey, it did lead to them getting Ross Jackson, so I guess it worked out in the end. And Sambér, of course, signs a prove-it deal with Snooze Enterprises. And last year, he won pole position for at the Streets Computerville, led some laps in that race, but really didn't do much the rest of the year. He had 3 top 5 finishes. He finished just outside the top 10 in the standings. So he was okay, but nothing too special, nothing to write home about. But this year, we've seen that if you give this guy championship level equipment, he's going to give you championship level qualifying efforts. Third, second, and first in qualifying the past 3 weeks. The problem is he has not been delivering championship level results. And that's why he entered this race 22nd in points. But the raw pace of this A team, I think, has to be the most astounding part, the most shocking part. And we know that Snoots nailed the new regulations. And it really does bode well for Lucas Sambér's free agency. I'd expect that he'll test the market. I highly doubt, especially at his age, he's going to be 32 years old next year. Like, he's not going to take a team-friendly deal to be Greg Healy's number 2 driver. Like, he's going to test the market, and he's going to get a bag in free agency. Because as it stands, I think he's the most lucrative name to hit the open market. I think his stock right now is definitely higher than Ryan Dixon's, even though they are the same age. Sambér ascending, Dixon descending. Even though Dixon's had a solid year himself this year so far, but and it's also certainly higher than Jared Ayers' stock. And let's talk about the incident. Let's stop fluffing about. Let's discuss that moment. 26 laps to go, Jared Ayers and Lucas Sambér. So I think that people are ridiculous if they're trying to blame Lucas Sambér for the accident. It was not his fault. You have to understand that the Stone Yard, incredibly narrow. There's basically only one groove, that very high lane right up next to the wall. Little margin for error. We know this. It's the Stone Yard. But that's, the allure of the track. It's so tough to drive. It's a driver's racetrack. If you succeed, you are one of the most talented drivers in the sport. So yeah, there's not much room to maneuver. And that's why, if you need help from lappers. And, if you're the leader and you got a lap card that you got history with that lap card, they can really come back to haunt you and really bite you in the butt. And we saw that with Jared Ayers and Lucas Sambér. Just kind of analyzing the incident, 26 laps to go. Ayers Sambér caught Ayers for about 2 to 3 laps. Really couldn't do much with them because it's so tough to pass here. You really have to kind of set up that move. And, Brayden Bennett by this time had caught Sambér back. So Sambér knew that he had to go and he had to make something happen. And, he did. He punted Ayers into the wall and, Bennett saw this opportunity and he straight up pounced, dived out of the bottom underneath Sambér and basically used his teammate Ayers as a pick. And the rest, as I say, is history. So who is at fault for the incident? Obviously, it's Jared Ayers. He was 1 lap down at the time, about to go 2 laps down. It's clearly his fault, what he did. That's on him. However, I can see it from Ayers' perspective. And I think that if you did not see the in-depth analysis that ASC Hall of Famer Jimmy Hood did on the ASCA social media channels, definitely go check that out because there's a precedent that's been set here. There's history between these guys. We know they've been involved in numerous incidents over the years. They don't like each other. They still don't like each other. They probably never will like each other. That's just a matter of fact, matter of the situation. But there was a precedent set here. 2024. Now, granted, it was much earlier in the race, but it was this exact race 2 years ago. And basically, the roles were reversed. Sambér didn't want to move out of Ayers' way, and Ayers punted him into the wall. He lost the lead to Cameron Atwood and ultimately ended up DNFing later in the race. Now, at the time, that putt into the wall cut what was it? Sambér's tire down, and he ended up DNFing about 20 laps later. So he got instant karma there. And I guess you could say he also got his comeuppance here, 2 years later. Like, Ayers did not forget about that. And on a race where he's already having a bad time, any chance that you get to deny your arch nemesis of their first career victory, especially if it can help your team, I can see why he did it. It's not like it was certainly not team orders. Ayers, his relationship with Michael White Racing, we saw they didn't even appeal the penalty. Like I don't think Michael White Racing cares very much if Ayers gets suspended. In fact, they probably want him to get suspended so they can stick Tony Del Valle in the 24 race and get us some extra experience for 2027. So it wasn't team orders. You can throw that out the window. Did Ayers deserve to be suspended for this? No. Did he deserve probation for the incident? Yes. Now, not just for this incident, but he also had to deal with Healy a couple weeks ago. So it kind of sets this precedent that Ayers has been out of control. And I mean, his entire career, he's been out of control. But specifically, once again, this season, it just seems like he's not really learning his lesson. And you have to, if you're the ASCA, you have to kind of step in and do something, because he's involved in way too many incidents, especially this early in the season. Like, we're only 4 weeks into the season, and he's been involved in incidents in 2 out of the 4 races. It's just unacceptable, So I think that probation for the rest of the year is fair. I think that a suspension would have been too much. Even though, I can see why people say even probation is too harsh. Like, it's just revenge between these guys, and they just keep going back and forth, throwing haymakers at each other. But yeah, it's a tough deal. You certainly got to feel for Lucas Sambér. He wasn't at fault. I don't think he did anything wrong. There's nothing more he could have done. He had to go at that point. Bennett was right there. Like, he had to get around Ayers. But, at the Stone Yard, there's nowhere really to pass. So he was kind of put in a box, kind of backed against the wall, and he had to do something. And you got to feel for him, but you can't say, looking at that incident that these two had a couple years ago, that he didn't have it coming. So I think that both drivers did what was best for them. And at the end of the day, they both lost the race. So you'd hope that they can get this ironed out, because this back and forth, it's really costing them both. So hopefully they can sit down, get it ironed out, especially for Ayers' sake. He's on probation. So if he's involved in any more shenanigans, he's done. He's getting suspended. And like I said, Micro Racing, they will be the first ones to not appeal that suspension and throw Tony Del Valle II in the car as a super sub to get him some extra cup seat time. So for Ayers' sake, especially considering he's going to be hitting the open market, like, he does not have a job for next year lined up, he really needs to be on his best behavior the rest of this season, just to ensure that his cup career even stays afloat at this point. So there's that. Let's also talk Toyota as a whole. And I just want to give a huge shout out to them as a manufacturer. They won a combined 2 races in the past 2 years, 2024 and 2025. Both came from Brayden Bennett. If you go all the way back to 2023, they won only 5 races in that span. So from 2023 to 2025, they won a combined 5 races, all 5 being from Brayden Bennett and Randall Woods. This year, Toyota has won 3 out of the first 4 races with 3 different drivers. Obviously, you got Bennett, but you've also got Jackson. You've got Renard. Woods has been hit or miss, but he's been solid. I believe he's still right around the top 10 in points. Ayers has obviously been a disaster, but he's on the way out. Renard, we've documented him. He's right up there in the point standings, currently second. Like, they're back. They are back. Ross Jackson, even Flores Motorsports, is now a top 10 team, consistently running up inside the top 5, top 10. Not challenging for wins on tracks that aren't play tracks, but hey, this is a giant leap forward considering this was a back marker team last year. It's crazy the difference a year makes and the difference of taking that time to invest in top tier personnel. Sheldon Price is already making a huge difference for that 23 team. You can see it week in and week out. They show up in the ballpark, and you can see the impact that not having Sheldon Price is having on Diego Ortiz, as his vintage radio outbursts are back. So yeah, there's that. We'll probably talk more about that as the season wears on. But yeah, just wanted to give a huge shout out to Toyota. Instead of giving up completely, considering they've gone through 2 seasons of pain and suffering and just lack of speed, especially that winless 2024. It's embarrassing for a top level organization, but they've come back with the vengeance. And I think there's a very real shot they have of winning this championship. And this kind of reminds me of the 2019 season for Toyota, which is ironic because that was Randall Woods' first at the team, and now they're finally back to where they were then in his final season at the team. And yeah, so they've nailed the new regulations. Not probably as much as Snoots. They don't have the raw pace, but look who's winning the races. That's what matters the most. So, yeah, huge for Toyota. They're definitely a pleasant surprise to kick off the new year. But let's talk more about the biggest surprises and disappointments through the first quarter of 2026. So we're 4 races in. Like I said, it's an odd number of races, so it doesn't work like it used to when it was 16. Now it's 17. Yeah, so 17 races, but it's still 16 points paying race weekend. So I'm going to consider this the end of the first quarter of the season. And we're starting to get an indication of who's good and who's not. I think it's going to be another couple weeks until we get a very clear picture of who is going to be competing for this championship. Because right now, I'll be honest, I still have no idea who's going to win it. I think if you had to bet money on anyone, I bet money on Diego because he's just lurking right there in 5th. And Arcadia's Racing still doesn't have speed. So once they get that speed back that they had last year, especially, oh my. And of course, he's a 4-time champion. But we're kind of starting to get the contenders and the pretenders filtered out. Like Marcus Edwards dropped 10 spots after his DNF. From 5th to 15th, pretender. Brayden Bennett jumped up 9 spots after his win, P13 to P4, contender. So we're starting to filter that out. And with that in mind, here's my biggest surprises and disappointments of 2026 thus far. So, biggest surprises. I talked about this before the season. If you listen to that season preview episode, I told you, watch for the forgotten generation. Carson Schmidt, Colin Ward, Braden Bennett, Shane Park. I told you to watch for these guys. And look at where they are. You got Carson Schmidt right up there leading the point standings. You've got Colin Ward tied for 2nd. You got Braden Bennett in 4th. They're right up there. And my biggest surprise of this year has to be Carson Schmidt, to be honest with you. Here's the deal. Carson Smith over 1 lap is one of the best drivers in the sport. And he's been qualifying horrifically this season. He just qualified, 17th at the Stoneyard. He qualified 12th at West Virginia. That tells you that Arcadia Bros Racing right now, they're lacking raw pace. Yet, here he is leading the point standings by double digits. 3 top 5s in 4 races. And in all 3 of those races, he started outside the top 10. So that tells you when one of the best qualifiers in the sport can't qualify well, yet is still dragging out these quality results, and as it stands, is leading the point standings by 12. Again, Carson Smith, only 23 years old, mind you. He has grown and developed so much from his rookie year. Um, and this is why Cup drivers are looking for those teenage young talents to grow, mold, and develop. Because Carson Smith, they threw him in the Cup Series at 20 years old. He was terrible. But slowly but surely, he got more seat time. He got more experience. He won a pole towards the end of his rookie season. And then his sophomore season started to grow, started to develop. He had that great performance at Belltown and those final four races in his sophomore campaign. It clicked. Something clicked for him. And he eventually got the win at West Virginia. And now we fast forward to his fourth season. Now he's leading the point standings. Now he's a serious championship contender. Like, this is why team owners are so hungry to find that young talent. And yeah, huge surprise for me has been Carson Schmidt. And it's not that I didn't think he could do this. It's just that the fact that he's doing it so soon. He's only 23 years old. Like, he still has a long ways to go. I wouldn't even consider him in the prime of his career right now. And he's pulling out these results, racing like a veteran this season. He's patient. He takes what he's given. He makes the right adjustments. He and Will Hamilton together, his crew chief. Um, just outstanding from Carson Smith this year. And then Colin Ward. He's another guy who, not really surprised that he's up there, but I am surprised considering the circumstances and how the rest of his team is performing that he's doing this well this soon. Literally carrying the defending championship winning organization on his back right now. The only Ronnie Woods Motorsports entry inside the top 10 in points, which is shocking 4 races into the campaign. Considering you thought out of those guys at Ronnie Woods Motorsports, the least likely to win a championship this year would probably be Ward. You thought he'd be the least likely to win a title. Yet here he is. He's right up there, was leading the points. Unfortunately, got caught up in Bern Reynolds' tire blowout, but he's tied for second in the standings. He's very much a threat. He's going to win a race this season. Like, another one of these forgotten generation guys, which I told you guys, if you've been listening, I put you on game. I told you, watch for these guys. They're entering the prime of their career. And while everyone's talking about the next youth movement and Doherty and Noel and Dunham and Thorson and all those guys, I get it. They're going to be great. But let's talk about the youth movement that's performing right now and really taking over this sport. Colin Ward, another one of those big faces. And like I said, similarly to Carson Schmidt, doing it for a team, Ronnie Woods Motorsports, that's behind with the new regulations. He's that high in the standings. When we get to later in the season and those two teams, those powerhouse organizations, they get those regulations right, those two, I'm just saying, like, they might become unstoppable considering they're doing this in inferior equipment to their competitors, the rest of the field right now. As for my disappointments, this is going to sound generic, but the rest of Ronnie Woods Motorsports, and it's kind of beating a dead horse talking about Todd Kidd and Chris Barrymore's struggles. So I wanted to spend a minute to talk more about Shane Park. We haven't really talked much about him this season, and that's a problem because I thought, I just talked about it with the forgotten youth movement, Schmidt, Ward, Bennett, all those guys right up there in the point standings. First, tied for second, fourth, they're all up there. And then you got Park in 13th in the point standings. He's supposed to be up there with those guys. And you look at the last 2 weeks, he obviously had the suck throttle at West Virginia, but he was nowhere. He was nowhere in that race. I think he was running, 19th when that happened? DNF in that race, and then you come back at the Stone Yard, he gets a speeding penalty, and he never recovers. He goes a lap down. He finishes, what, 13th? I mean, extremely lackluster performance out of Park. And he has these moments where he just doesn't kind of show up for whatever reason. But he hasn't really had much of those the past 2 years. But he laid an egg, flat out laid an egg on Saturday, and that's just unacceptable for a title contender. Especially one who has the experience of Park. He was the defending winner of that race, the Common Scope 200, and he comes back the next year and finishes, what, 13th, a lap down. Just an unacceptable performance. Now he's 13th in points, and uh, I'm not going to say like his title hopes are completely ruined, but he has to win at least one, if not sweep the doubleheader of Michigan, I think, to get back in the hunt, because he's still not taking the next step on oval tracks like I kind of anticipated he would. Um, Now I get it. Part of it's kind of due to the new regulations, but he's not a guy that can make up the deficit on these short tracks or a place like the Stone Yard and really capitalize on places where that aerodynamic gap is much smaller. Like, he needs to have a great car to perform on the more high speed aero sensitive tracks. Now, that's not to say that Park's not an extremely talented driver, because he is. We know the resume. He's won 4 cup races. He's won a Craftsman Series championship. He's finished top 3 in points the last 2 years. But man, you have to kind of wonder, like, how much of that was his equipment and how much of that was him actually developing as a driver. And again, that's like nothing against Park, but he has to dig himself out of this hole these next couple weeks. And again, we know the deal with Todd Kidd and Chris Barrymore. We know that they're in a hole, but Park also isn't right there in a hole with them. He's way back in the standings. I think he's like 30, 40 back, something like that. It's not good. And again, he's only got, well, he does have an extra road course race to bail him out, which is good. But again, he has to capitalize. He didn't capitalize at the Streets Computerville earlier this season. He didn't win that race. So he has to win. He's got to win. And he has to do it soon. So we'll see if he can get that done. He needs big results. And the problem is he's not a bad short track driver, but he's not great at either Orlando or Belltown. So I really don't know. I don't know if he's going to be able to dig himself out of this. And it's shocking that Kidd, and Barrymore just nowhere near the championship right now. So that's probably a big reason why it's so wide open, the title race, is because you've got these Ronnie Woods Motorsports guys underperforming, while you've got guys like Carson Schmidt and Colin Ward and Bryn Renard and Braden Bennett kind of rising to take their place. Even Ryan Dixon, to an extent, up there a bit. So yeah, just that's pretty much it for my surprises and disappointments of the year thus far. And I get it. Still 13 races to go. A lot can change, but we shall see moving forward. Meanwhile, let's discuss Tico Bowden Motorsports briefly here. And let me suggest, if you did not listen to the latest episode of The Call with Mike Brazier and his discussion with team owner Tico Bowden, definitely go check it out. Must listen. Definitely the most entertaining of that series thus far. It's quite the show. So definitely go check that one out. And that might help this move make some sense for you, because Doug Bowden has signed a 6-year, $60 million extension with Tico Bowden Motorsports that runs through the 33 season. So he will be with his dad's team until I believe his age 35 campaign. Actually, might be even. No, I think that's right. Got it right the first time. His age 35 campaign. It's an even longer contract than the one that Todd Kidd signed last season, and it's a significant pay raise for Bowden, up from $10 million compared to the $5 million salary that he's on right now. Now, keep in mind for Bowden, his current deal expires at the end of 2027, so this extension is an add-on to that. And so yeah, however, this is TBM's franchise driver. Doug Bowden is really the only person that keeps this organization semi-relevant at this point. He did, credit to Bowden though, he did just get a top 10 finish at the Stone Yard. Yeah, and he has stayed out of trouble for the most part this season. He hasn't really been involved in many incidents. So I mean, that's major improvement on his part. He's been much more quiet, which is good. We'll see. No, we had a couple more short tracks these next 2 weeks. So that's where he could get his elbows out and get himself into some trouble again. But so far, though, this year he's been good. Good and much more tactical about his approach rather than aggressive and getting himself into trouble. He hasn't torn up any equipment to my knowledge. I don't think he has a DNF this season. So he's been solid this year. He's right around 14th, 15th in the standings last time I checked, which is damn good for a Tico Bowden Motorsports entry. So I understand why they gave him the extension, because obviously you can't let him out the building. However, I think there's been some rumors that TBM would be downsizing after this season, and Tico vehemently denied those rumors, saying that he's committed to Danny Bradford and running, 3 cars. I don't agree with that. In fact, I don't agree with that at all. I think that this team basically already is Doug Bowden and everybody else. Like, you've got Danny Bradford and Jack Ayers right at the bottom of the standings, and then you got Bowden, the only competitive car in the organization, and it's been that way since he returned to the team in 2023, I believe. And even before he got there, it kind of was that way with Cameron Atwood. It kind of was that way with Norm Lester. At least when Lester and Atwood were there together, they both had their days where they were competitive. But now it's just Bowden and it's everyone else. And they made a huge financial commitment to Bowden here, $10 million a season. That's probably taking away a lot of research and development money, taking away a lot of salary money, payroll money for Danny Bradford, and potentially bringing Jack Ayers back. Speaking of Jack Ayers, we still have no idea what's the deal with him. Is he going to return? Who knows? A decision still has yet to be made on that. We'll probably see within the next few weeks. That's what we're hearing. But yeah, so I agree with the extension. I don't agree with the process. I think that it's time for Tico to kind of just admit it. Like, your son is your whole team, and just lean into it. Cut the 10, cut the 14, get him out of here, and downsize to 1 car and put all your efforts in your son. And that, I think, should be the move, to be honest with you. You got him locked up through 2033 already. If you really want your son to win a championship, that's what Tico should do. But Tico is Tico. He's going to do what he wants to do. No one's going to tell him otherwise. So it's like I'm talking to a wall trying to suggest this. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. We'll see if they re-sign Ayers in a few weeks, probably. But yeah, I like the extension. Just don't like the process that TBM is going about with their whole organization right there, their organizational structure. But yeah, here's the final talking point of the podcast. Let's talk Orlando Motor Speedway. The Craftsman series is finally back after an early week off. It feels like it's been ages since we last saw them on track. And last time we did, um, it was a disaster for the Ford Development Program. Boss Jackson took home victory. And yeah, so basically, it's going to be another opportunity, should say, for the Craftsman regulars to kind of assert themselves and go up against Cup guys. And with the likes of Cameron Atwood, Braden Bennett, and Doug Fallon entered in the show, they're going to have a tough time doing so. So I should very much say that. So going to be an interesting fight. Aiden Romo's also in the 16, in case you were curious, to get himself some extra seat time. But kind of breaking down the Craftsman race, I think that the ones to watch got to be the defending champion, Sean Wooden. He needs a big result in the worst way. He enters 15th in the standings. Last time we saw him, he DNF'd on pit road. So yeah, he's had 2 DNFs in the first 3 weeks. He's got to get going. It's not an insurmountable deficit. He's overcome worse before to challenge Colin Ward for the title in 2023. That was such an incredible title fight, but he's got his work cut out for him, being 15th in the standings right now. So he needs a big result. I also would say keep a close eye on Will Moon as well. Won the last short track race, nearly won this race a year ago. Graham Darty ended up getting the job done. And of course, Darty, a Cup driver now, so he won't be entered in the field. So Will Moon, I think the door certainly has to be open for him as well to be a factor and a contender. He seems to have some really good short track prowess kind of out of nowhere. So, and then another guy, Nick Painter, right up there in the standings, won the season opener, led the most laps in this race last year before Aiden Romo took home the victory. Romo should be a factor, but how much of a factor he's going to be, we'll see. GAM has been rather hit or miss with the speed this year, so I don't know. But that's who to watch for in terms of Craftsman regulars. But I got Cameron Atwood winning this race. I think he's frustrated. He's pissed off. He lost another one at the Stone Yard. His Stone Yard finishes, man, he's finished second there a bunch. And he comes to Orlando pissed off, and he normally wins this race. He won it in 2024. He didn't win it last year because he wasn't entered in the race, only entered in the Cup show. Yeah, so I got my money on Atwood. He's going to be fuming, pissed off after last week. I think he gets the job done. And then moving on to the Cup race. Speaking of guys to watch in that, we also got to talk a little bit about Brayden Bennett, Cameron Atwood. They're both going to be on the Craftsman show. They're both going to be on the Cup show. And again, if you recall, 2024, they dueled each other in both of those races. I think we're going to see a very similar thing in 2026. They also briefly fought for the lead last year as well. Bennett took the lead, drove off, didn't look back. So yeah, I think it's going to be a fight between those two and Greg Healy at his home track as well, because we know Snoots Enterprises, they have pace. And here's the deal also, another key to watch out for. This is not going to be a get-right race for Ronnie Woods Motorsports. When they had a distinct advantage in terms of equipment last year, their guys were nowhere to be found. You know, it was a 1-2 for Michael White Racing last year, and we know they weren't back to 100%. Like, their equipment was nowhere near the level that, you know, it is now. Brayden Bennett won the last short track race, defeating the likes of Todd Kidd, you know, and Diego Ricciardi, who were in much more, I wouldn't say souped up, but, you know, they were putting all their resources into the 2025 regulations. Bennett and Michael White Racing were not. And now that we know that Michael White Racing has the advantage with the new regs, I think that that's going to give them a slight leg up, because, you know, equipment doesn't matter too much on short tracks. It really comes down to driver talent here, but it certainly can't help giving guys like Atwood, Bennett, and Healy all better equipment. So yeah, I I think it's gonna be a dogfight between Bennett, Atwood, and Healy. And what order they'll finish in, I have Atwood winning the Craftsman race. For the Cup race, is it gonna be Atwood getting the weekend sweep done? You know what? Screw it. That's what I'm gonna pick. Um, like I said, he's got to be frustrated after the way that things went down last week and how close he came to victory. He was frustrated last year here. Just things didn't quite work out. He got caught up in an incident with Greg Healy. Atwood has this, when he's angry, when he's upset, that's when he kind of drives at his best. So I think Atwood sweeps the weekend just like he did a couple of years ago. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for this edition of Around the Association. I hope I did not say ASC Weekly Podcast earlier, because if I did, yeah, bell me. If you know that reference. But yeah, shout out to everyone who's listened this far. Busy week, light week at the Stone Yard, but a lot of drama, I should say. And we should certainly see a lot of drama under the lights in the Sunshine State. Cannot wait for some short track action at Orlando Motor Speedway. We'll see you next week to recap it all.